want to welcome you gently, the way I always do. And if you feel something in this story, please like, share, and subscribe before we begin. Because today, I'm thinking about why a simple envelope can show a whole family's heart. It happened on Christmas morning. During a quiet vacation, we planned so no one would feel pressure. And I remember standing by the tree with the soft lights touching my hands while I held those envelopes that carried the reason behind the title. I didn't say a word when I placed them on the table because I wanted the moment to feel simple, small, almost invisible. The way people sometimes see me when they forget who built the life they stand on. I watched my children and the in-laws, and even the older grandkids rush around with loud voices about who brought what gift and who forgot which tradition. And I stood there with my calm mask, the one I've worn since the days when a single dollar meant food or hunger, thinking how strange it is that now $500,000 feels light in my hands. I didn't notice the envelopes, not even when one slipped to the floor near the trash bag. They were filling with torn wrapping paper and broken ribbons. And I felt that familiar, quiet pain rise in my chest, not because of the money, but because I could see how little they expected anything meaningful from me unless it came with noise or glory. I wanted that moment to show me something, and it did, because when my son's wife scooped up all the stray wrapping scraps, she grabbed the envelopes too, treating them like leftover paper. And I stood still as she dropped everything straight into the trash without looking twice. I didn't speak, not even when the bag thudded to the corner, and everyone kept laughing and moving. And I kept listening to my own heartbeat, slow and steady, waiting for the second that would reveal something deeper about the people I loved. And when my grandson tugged my sleeve and whispered something he shouldn't have seen, the whole morning shifted in a way none of them were ready for. And that was the moment everything started to unravel, because he wasn't supposed to find what he found. He pulled me toward the corner where the trash bag sat leaning, and I followed him without letting the others sense the weight in my steps, because I knew the moment I touched that bag, the air in the room would change. He told me he saw something shiny inside, something with my handwriting, and my breath stayed calm, even though my heart pressed against my ribs like it wanted to speak for me. And I bent down slowly, letting the sounds of Christmas chatter blur behind me. When I opened the bag, just enough to see the stack of white envelopes mixed with torn paper and plastic, a stillness passed through me, the kind that comes when life shows you the truth without raising its voice. My grandson stood close, watching my face the way children do when they sense adults hiding storms. And I gently picked up the envelopes, brushing off bits of tape and ribbon that stuck to them, as if they were begging to be noticed. I didn't call anyone over. I didn't raise my tone. I just walked back to the table and placed all the envelopes in a line, each one carrying $500,000 meant to bless them, meant to ease their silent burdens, meant to show them that my love didn't always come dressed in fancy boxes. And yet, they hadn't cared enough to even open what was right in front of them. When my daughter finally noticed me standing there, she asked why I looked so still, and I told her to gather everyone because I needed a minute of their eyes, just their eyes, nothing else. He circled around the table slowly, confused, some annoyed, some impatient, none of them understanding the quiet shift happening inside me. And when I asked who threw these envelopes away without looking inside, the room fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the floor dipped under us. And that silence told me more about their hearts than any explanation could, because not one person stepped forward. Instead, they started glancing at each other, at the envelopes, at me, wondering why my calm tone carried the kind of truth people run from. And in that moment, I saw something in their faces I hadn't seen in years. Something raw, something uneasy, something that would only break further when they learned what they had lost. I watched their eyes move from the envelopes to each other, then back to me, as if the truth might rearrange itself if they hesitated long enough. And I stayed steady, letting the quiet stretch across the room until it touched every corner, because silence reveals more than anger ever could. My son shifted first, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when caught in something he didn't want to admit. And my daughter kept pressing her lips together, searching for a safe excuse that wouldn't make her look careless. But none of them realized the calm in my voice was stronger than any explanation they could offer. I told them gently that inside each envelope was something they might have opened if it had come in a shiny box or with a loud announcement. And the way their faces tightened told me they suddenly remembered every moment they had brushed past that simple white paper without a second thought. My daughter-in-law stepped closer, whispering that she thought they were old receipts I left around, and the words sank into my chest like a soft weight, because it wasn't the mistake that hurt. It was how little value they placed on anything that didn't look expensive on the outside. I kept my hands on the envelopes, running my thumb along the sealed edges, feeling the thickness of the checks inside. And I told them that sometimes blessings arrive quietly, the same way struggle once arrived quietly in my life when I was young and counting coins. And their eyes dropped to the floor, because they knew what I was saying without me saying it directly. My son finally asked what was inside, his voice thin, and I didn't answer him right away. I just slid the first envelope toward him and told him to open it in front of everyone, so there would be no confusion later. He hesitated, almost afraid, then tore it open fast like ripping off a bandage. And when he pulled out the check and saw the number, $500,000, his breath caught loud enough that everyone heard it, and the room cracked open with a shock so sharp it felt like glass breaking in slow motion. My daughter gasped, covering her mouth. The in-laws went rigid, and the grandkids looked at each other with wide eyes. But I stayed still, watching them confront the truth they had thrown away like trash. Then my daughter reached for her envelope with shaking fingers, desperate now. And that sudden shift in energy, fear mixed with greed, mixed with guilt, told me the morning was only beginning and the real explosion was still waiting to happen. In a way, none of them were ready for. My daughter tore her envelope open so fast the paper flew. When she saw her own $500,000 check with her name printed in clear letters, her knees softened like they were trying to understand what they almost threw away without a glance. But I stayed calm, watching the weight of her choices settle on her shoulders. She kept whispering, "Mama, I didn't know, over and over." But I didn't rush to comfort her, not this time, because the truth had to sit with her the way shame sits with a person who expected the gift to look richer than the giver. My daughter-in-law stood frozen, her eyes locked on the envelopes like they were suddenly alive. And when she reached for hers, it wasn't gentle, it was frantic. The kind of frantic that comes when someone realizes they mistook real value for trash. And I saw the old fear in her eyes, the fear of losing access to money she depended on more than she ever admitted. My son tried to speak, to soften everything with a joke like he always did. But the moment he opened his mouth, the guilt made his voice crack, and he closed it again. Because there are days when jokes can't save a person from what they've done. The room was tight, air thick, as each family member opened their envelope one by one, and every gasp felt like a confession. Every trembling hand felt like an apology they didn't know how to say out loud. The grandkids watched from the couch, eyes wide, realizing the adults around them had tossed away fortunes they had only dreamed about in whispers. And even the youngest seemed to understand that something big had broken in the room. Something that couldn't be taped back together with quick words or nervous smiles. I stood there with my quiet face, the one I've worn since those years when my late husband and I stretched pennies to survive, letting them feel every second of the truth, that they didn't miss out on money. They missed out on respect, on attention, on seeing me beyond what I could give them. Finally, my daughter looked at me with tears building, asking why I didn't tell them what was inside, why I didn't warn them, why I didn't stop them from tossing it into the trash like meaningless scraps. And I told her softly that sometimes people show their hearts when they think life isn't watching. The room fell into another deep silence, and they all stared at me as if waiting for forgiveness. But before I could even breathe, my son's wife stepped forward with a trembling voice and said something that made every head turn and every emotion crack open again. Because she didn't reach for an apology, she reached for blame. She stepped closer, her hands shaking but her tone trying to stay firm. And she said it was my fault they threw the envelopes away, because I hid money in a way no normal person would. And the room froze around her words, like the air had turned to ice. I didn't speak, not yet, because the way she looked at me, tight jaw, sharp eyes, fear wrapped in pride, told me she wasn't finished. And everyone else watched her, waiting to see how far she would push herself into the corner she was building with her own mouth. She said I should have handed the checks out openly, proudly, loudly, the same way she claimed wealthy people do when they want attention. And that quiet pain I keep under my ribs stirred again, not because of the money, but because she still didn't understand me after all these years under my roof, under my company's name, under the life I built with my bare hands when I had nothing. My daughter flinched at her words. My son looked like he wished he could disappear, but my daughter-in-law kept going, saying the envelopes looked cheap, plain, forgettable. And she didn't think a woman with my resources would ever give something meaningful without announcing it first. She didn't realize she was confessing more about herself than about me. And I watched her slowly unravel, piece by piece, while the family stared at her in a mix of disbelief and silent judgment. I finally lifted my chin, just a little, enough for her to feel the shift in the room. And I told her in a calm voice that if a person cannot respect something simple, they will never handle something valuable, no matter how much it's worth. She blinked fast, as if the words hit her harder than she expected, and she looked at the check in her hand like it was suddenly too heavy to hold. But before anyone could absorb that truth, she stepped back and said something sharper, something she should have held inside, something that made my son's face drain of color. She said maybe the reason I hid the money was to test them, to trap them, to expose them. And she accused me of playing games with inheritance again. And the moment that word, inheritance, fell into the room, every head turned toward her like she had pulled a pin out of a quiet grenade. My son whispered her name, warning her, but she didn't stop. She said she knew I controlled everything, every account, every share, every property, and that I always gave with one hand while holding power tight in the other. The room tightened, breath by breath, and I felt all the secrets they never dared say out loud creeping into the open like shadows moving across the floor. And when I finally looked her straight in the eyes and asked her a question she didn't expect, the whole family stiffened, because it was a question that would force the truth into the light, whether they wanted it or not. I asked her, in the same soft tone I use when my heart is heavier than my words, why she spoke about inheritance with such certainty. What made her so sure she knew what belonged to her, or what she thought she deserved from a life she didn't help me build. The question landed in the center of the room like a quiet thunderclap, and she froze, her lips parting, but no sound coming out, because she hadn't expected me to reach directly into the truth she was trying so hard to hide behind blame. My son stepped forward as if to shield her, but even he knew this moment was hers alone, because the look in my eyes wasn't anger, it was clarity, the kind that makes people reveal themselves without meaning to. She tried to explain, stumbling over words that tangled together, saying she wasn't talking about money, even though everyone knew she was, and that she only meant to say families should communicate better. But the guilt in her voice made every syllable tremble. My daughter folded her arms, watching her with a quiet glare that carried every suspicion she had swallowed over the years. And even the grandkids went still, sensing that something deep and grown-up was unfolding right in front of them. I stepped closer, just enough to make her face me fully, and I told her the truth I had held in my chest for months, that I knew she had been asking questions about my accounts, my properties, my shares, and that people in my company had already informed me about her curiosity. Her eyes widened, panic blooming across her expression in slow waves, and she looked at my son in desperation, hoping he didn't know. He didn't. His whole face fell open with confusion and hurt, because he never imagined she would go behind his back to dig into money she hadn't earned. She whispered his name, trying to hold his gaze, but he stepped away from her like the floor shifted under him. Then she looked back at me, pleading now, saying she only asked because she wanted to secure the family's future. And the words sounded rehearsed, thin, scared. I told her calmly that the envelopes weren't a test, they weren't a trap, and they weren't a game. They were a gift from a woman who once had nothing, and learned that wealth only reveals people. It doesn't change them. The room pulsed with tension, everyone holding their breath, waiting for what came next. But before I could speak again, my daughter suddenly turned toward her brother with a tight, trembling voice and said something that cracked the entire family open in one sharp moment. Something about a conversation she overheard weeks ago, one she had kept to herself, one she never meant to reveal unless forced. And now, the force was standing right in front of her. She looked at her brother with that tight breath she takes when she's holding something dangerous. And before he could stop her, she said she heard his wife on the phone weeks ago asking someone how soon the transfers would be ready once my health started declining. And the words hit the room so hard, even the Christmas lights seemed to flicker. My son's face broke open in shock. Not anger yet, just disbelief. The kind that makes a person forget how to breathe. And he stared at his wife like she was suddenly a stranger wearing a familiar face. She tried to interrupt, shaking her head fast, insisting my daughter misunderstood. But my daughter kept talking, quietly, carefully, as if each word was pulled straight from her memory, saying she heard her sister-in-law asking about my assets, asking who had legal access, asking whether the old paperwork was still valid, and every word made the room shrink tighter around us. My daughter-in-law's voice rose, sharp and desperate, telling her to stop lying. But the panic in her tone betrayed her, and I watched my son's hands tremble as he whispered her name with a question built inside it, a question about betrayal he never thought he'd ask. She reached for him, trying to hold his arm, but he stepped back again, and the way he looked at her told me something inside him had shifted in a way that wouldn't return to how it was. I stood still, letting them face each other, letting the truth find its own place between them. Because sometimes a family needs the silence to hear what their hearts refused to notice before. My daughter-in-law finally snapped, saying she only asked those things to prepare, in case something happened to me, that she wasn't trying to take anything early, that she was just being smart for the future. But the excuses fell flat, landing on the floor like broken ornaments no one wanted to pick up. My daughter whispered that she didn't tell me earlier because she didn't want to start a war. And for a moment, the room went cold, everyone realizing this war had already been burning quietly under our feet long before today. My son asked his wife why she never told him about those calls, why she went behind his back, why she wanted to know more about my money than he did. And she finally cracked, shouting that she was tired of feeling powerless in a family where I controlled everything. Her voice echoed off the walls, raw and shaking, and she said she didn't want to wake up one day and find out she and her children had nothing because I changed my mind. She didn't realize the whole family was now staring at her, seeing her clearly for the first time, and even the grandkids looked confused, hurt, unsure of what all these grown-up fears meant. I kept my voice calm when I finally spoke, telling her that power isn't something people lose by being honest. It's something they lose by pretending, manipulating, reaching in the dark for things that were never promised. But before she could respond, my son stepped forward with a sudden breath and asked me something I never expected him to ask out loud, something fragile and trembling, something that would cut deeper than any accusation in the room, because it came from the quiet place inside him where he still wondered what he truly meant to me. The room shifted the moment I stepped forward, because everyone finally noticed the way I was staring at the trash can like it was holding a secret none of them were ready for. My heartbeat thudded slow, heavy, deliberate, because I knew the next 10 seconds would flip every smug assumption upside down. I bent down, fingertips grazing the edge of the garbage bag, and the whole room fell unnaturally quiet. My son whispered, "Mom, what are you doing?" in that impatient tone he uses when he thinks I'm being dramatic. But I wasn't being dramatic. They were being careless. My niece laughed under her breath, shaking her head like she'd already decided she'd witnessed peak grandma weirdness for the year. And still, none of them moved. None of them tried to stop me. None of them thought the envelopes mattered. That's what made the moment delicious. I slowly pulled out the first envelope, the corner crushed, a faint smear of gravy on it, and dusted it off. Their faces twitched, tiny flinches, first cracks, because I wasn't saying a word yet. And silence is terrifying when you know you might have messed up big. I held the envelope between my fingers, tapping it once, letting the weight of what was inside pulse through the air like a countdown they hadn't realized they triggered. And then I said it soft, calm, nuclear. This is worth more than everything under that tree. The shock hit them like a winter gust, slicing the room in half. Someone gasped. Someone cursed. Someone finally stepped forward. Too late. The avalanche had officially begun. Their footsteps scrambled toward me like a stampede the moment I reached back into the trash bag. And the panic on their faces was so raw, it almost made me laugh. Almost. My daughter-in-law's voice cracked. Janet, what is that supposed to mean? But she didn't dare touch the envelope in my hand, as if it might burn her. Good. Let it. My son kept glancing between me and the tree, like maybe this was some kind of twisted Christmas prank, like maybe the punchline would save him. It wouldn't. I pulled out the second envelope, the one with a small tear like someone ripped it open a centimeter, then got bored and tossed it. Hooks tightened around the room instantly, every set of eyes glued to the thin white rectangle that suddenly wasn't so boring anymore. My niece whispered, no way, Grandma, and backed up until she hit the wall, because realization can make a grown adult feel 5 years old again. I could feel their regret blooming, hot and choking, thicker than the scent of the turkey in the kitchen. I held both envelopes up slowly, letting the lamplight brush over them like a spotlight. Everything you threw away, I murmured, leaning just enough to make them step closer, was the biggest gift I've ever given any of you. Their throats bobbed, their hands twitched. Their hearts finally woke up. And I wasn't done. Not even close silence snapped tight around us. The kind that makes your skin prickle, because everyone can feel the truth coming before it hits. I let the envelopes dangle between my fingers, watching their guilt ripple through the room like heat off asphalt. My son finally broke. He stepped forward, voice trembling. Mom, just tell us what's inside. Oh, now he cared. Now they all cared. I tilted my head, studying the people who once claimed they loved my sentimental little traditions, yet couldn't be bothered to open the one envelope I asked them to. My daughter-in-law swallowed so hard I heard it, her hand inching forward like she was reaching for a bomb she hoped wouldn't explode. You really want to know? I asked, soft, dangerous. Their nods were frantic, hungry, desperate, cornered. I slid one envelope open just enough for the edge of the check to peek out, and the color drained from their faces like someone yanked out their souls. My niece gasped, covering her mouth. My grandson whispered, no freaking way. But I wasn't finished. I snapped the envelope shut again, holding it to my chest, watching panic flare again, bigger this time, meaner. You threw away $500,000. The words dropped like a hammer. Someone's knees buckled. Someone else cursed under their breath. And I just stood there, calm as snow, because the real shock, the real hook, I hadn't even revealed the twist waiting in the rest of those envelopes. The room erupted, not with sound, but with a choking, frantic silence that felt louder than any scream could. Their eyes bounced from the envelope to the trash bag, like they suddenly wished they could dive inside and rewind time with their bare hands. My son staggered back, whispering, 500,000 each, as if saying it out loud might shrink the number into something less humiliating. I didn't answer. I just reached deeper into the trash bag and pulled out another envelope, crumpled, greasy, from where someone tossed it on top of used paper plates. Hooks snapped tight across their faces again. Shame, fear, jealousy, all of it swirling like a storm. My daughter-in-law lunged forward. "Janet, please, just tell us if there's more," her voice cracked, trembling under the weight of a realization that hit them all at once. They didn't just throw away money. They threw away respect, trust, and every ounce of grace I had left to give. I brushed off a breadcrumb from the envelope, letting the small gesture burn them. "This one," I said quietly, "belonged to the person who insulted me the most tonight." Their heads whipped around, every guilty heart pounding like a trapped animal. No one wanted to ask the obvious question. No one dared, because the truth was settling in like ice water. There were more envelopes in that bag, more checks, more consequences. And I was about to show them exactly what ignorance costs. I held that crushed envelope between my fingers like it weighed more than the whole house, watching every face twist as they tried to guess whose shame I was about to expose next. The room turned cold, the kind of cold that crawls into bones, because they knew I never raised my voice, never made scenes, never punished. But when I went quiet like this, something worse always followed. My grandson whispered, "Grandma, can we fix it?" And his small voice cut deeper than all their excuses, because the child understood what the adults didn't. I didn't give money to be worshipped. I gave it to see what they did when they thought no one was looking. I pulled another envelope from the trash bag, this one folded as if someone had crushed it in their fist before throwing it away. My daughter's hand flew to her mouth, but I kept my face calm, the mask I've worn for decades slipping into place so smoothly they couldn't read me. "Every envelope had the same amount," I said softly, letting the words settle like dust on old wounds. But not everyone treated their gift the same way. Their stares sharpened, fear turning into wild guesses, wild guilt, wild panic, because they couldn't remember who tossed theirs first, who mocked the idea of Grandma's sentimental envelopes, who joked that I was trying to buy affection I already owned. I looked at my son's wife, the one who loved to whisper that I used money to control the family. Her eyes burned with silent begging, because now she understood the truth. Money never controlled them, but their greed always controlled them. I loosened my grip and let the crushed envelope fall onto the table, the paper landing with a soft sound that hit them harder than any slap. "This one belongs," I said quietly, "to the person who laughed the loudest about my gifts tonight." And every head turned, every breath caught, every memory sharpened, because someone in that room had mocked me openly, and I was about to make them face it. The moment I said those words, the whole room froze, as if time itself held its breath, and I watched them search their own memories with trembling eyes, digging through every joke, every whisper, every careless comment they tossed around when they thought I was too soft to hear. My son's wife clutched her sweater, her face draining as the echo of her own laughter came back to her, the way she'd called my envelopes old people gifts, the way she'd joked that I probably put a coupon inside. She tried to hide the guilt, but guilt has a way of climbing out through the eyes, no matter how deep you bury it. I didn't point at her. I didn't have to. Everyone already knew. My daughter shifted away from her. My grandson stared down at his shoes. My son swallowed hard, because even he remembered the moment she mocked me while he let her. I slid the crushed envelope toward the middle of the table and watched her hand twitch like she wanted to grab it, but feared touching her own mistake. "Funny thing," I whispered, letting the quiet stretch tight around their throats. The loudest laugh always tells the most truth. She looked at me then, really looked, and the fear in her eyes wasn't about the money. It was about how deeply she'd shown me her heart without meaning to. I kept my voice calm, steady, soft enough to sting. When someone laughs at a gift they haven't opened, they're not laughing at the gift, I said. They're laughing at the giver. Her breath shook. My son took a slow step forward, unsure if he was supposed to defend her or distance himself. But I wasn't finished, not even close. I reached into the trash bag again, feeling the scratch of torn paper against my fingers, and pulled out another envelope, this one ripped open just a little, as if someone peeked inside, saw nothing flashy, and tossed it away. The moment they saw the tear, every head jerked toward the same person at the same time, and the hook tightened again. The torn edge of that envelope sliced the room open in a different way. Because unlike the others, this one wasn't thrown away out of mockery. It was tossed aside after someone checked for something flashy, didn't see it fast enough, and decided it wasn't worth their time. I felt the weight of that small rip the same way I've felt every quiet betrayal in this family. Soft on the outside, but sharp underneath. My nephew stiffened the moment he saw it, his eyes darting to the floor like he could hide inside the rug, because he remembered exactly what he did. He'd pulled his envelope behind the counter earlier, peeled the flap open a little, and when he didn't see thick cash or jewelry, he muttered cheap under his breath and threw it out with the used napkins. I said nothing at the time. I just watched him toss away what he thought was worthless, the same way he's tossed away every opportunity I've ever handed him. Now, he stood there trying to swallow the truth, wiping his palms on his jeans, as if the guilt had turned into something sticky he couldn't wash off. His mother looked at him with disappointment, the kind that has lived in her bones for years. But she didn't speak. She never does when the truth leans too close. I brushed my thumb across the torn corner and let the rip show in the light, letting everyone see the impatience behind it. You opened this one, I said quietly, and the whole room saw the way his shoulders dropped, because there was no point denying it. But you only opened it halfway. He looked up then, desperate, small, searching for a version of this moment where he could talk himself out of the consequences, but his voice cracked before the words even formed. I set the torn envelope on the table beside the crushed one, side by side, like a row of truths they could no longer avoid. People show themselves in little ways, I whispered, how they treat what they don't understand, how they judge what doesn't shine right away. The silence that followed felt heavier than anger, because they all knew I wasn't talking about envelopes anymore. My son stepped closer, ready to say something, anything, but I lifted my hand slightly and stopped him, watching every face tilt between fear and regret. Then I reached one last time into the trash bag, deeper than before, past the crumpled plates and broken wrapping paper, until my fingers touched something thicker, heavier, wet from a spill no one bothered to clean. When I pulled it out, the entire room recoiled, because this envelope wasn't just thrown away, it had been destroyed. And the moment they saw whose handwriting was on the front, every breath in the room snapped tight again. The envelope was soaked through, the ink bleeding down the front like it had cried before anyone in the room ever did, and I could feel the weight of every careless hand that touched it before it hit the trash. Grease stains spread across the corners. A smear of something sticky ran along the back, and the moment their eyes landed on the handwriting, my handwriting, the name written in slow, careful strokes, They all knew exactly who had done it. My daughter stepped back as if the envelope were fire, because she recognized the awful truth before anyone else remembered it. She was the one who'd swept all the wrapping paper off the table earlier, pushing every boring envelope into a pile and shoving it toward the bin while complaining she didn't come here for sentimental stuff. She had been angry that I canceled a company meeting to join the family tonight, angry that I still had power she couldn't reach, angry that I chose peace over her ambition. And without knowing it, she had taken that anger and smeared it across her own name. I held the ruined envelope up, letting the dripping corner pull their eyes toward her, and she tried to hide her shaking hands behind her back. My son whispered her name, soft, stunned, unsure how to protect her from something she'd done to herself, but she lifted her chin anyway, the same stubborn pride she inherited from me rising through her fear. It was an accident, she said, but even her own voice didn't believe it. I didn't answer. I just watched her the way a mother watches a child lie for the first time, knowing the lie was smaller than the wound beneath it. I set the soaked envelope on the table, water spreading in a small circle that made everyone take a step back, as if the truth might spread too. Some gifts, I said quietly, can survive being ignored. Others don't survive being handled with anger. She looked at the ruined paper like it was the mirror she'd spent her whole life avoiding. And for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, hurt, proud, reaching for things she didn't understand. My nephew took a breath to speak, but before a single word came out, something inside the trash bag shifted with a soft crackle. I felt it under my hand, the shape of something none of them expected me to find. And when I reached in and pulled it out, the whole room gasped, because this envelope wasn't damaged. It was untouched, and the name written on it shook them more than all the ruined ones combined. The untouched envelope lay in my hand like a quiet accusation, its edges straight, its white surface clean, not a single wrinkle or fingerprint on it, as if someone had placed it down gently and walked away before deciding whether they deserved to open anything from me at all. The name written on the front was small, careful, almost hesitant, and the moment they saw it, the room shifted in a way that made every heart beat louder. It was my late husband's brother, Samuel, the one who hovered around family gatherings like a shadow that didn't want light, the one who never asked me for money, but never let go of the belief that I ruined his brother's life by becoming richer than all of them combined. He stood in the corner now, stiff, arms crossed, jaw locked tight, as if he could hide from the very envelope he'd intentionally ignored. He didn't throw it away. He didn't mock it. He didn't tear it. He simply refused to touch it, as if accepting anything from me meant admitting I had helped him more than he ever helped himself. I looked at him, and for the first time that night, someone looked back at me without panic, only with old, bitter pride. "You left yours on the mantel," I said softly. "Didn't even try to open it." He shrugged, but his eyes flickered, betraying the one truth he'd never say out loud, that he feared what was inside, not because of the money, but because it might mean he misjudged me all these years. "I don't need your charity," he muttered, and the quiet in his voice held more pain than the anger swirling in the room. My son clenched his jaw, ready to jump in, but I lifted a hand and kept the space still. "It was never charity," I whispered, and his breathing faltered just enough to prove he heard me deeper than he wanted to. I set the untouched envelope apart from the ruined ones. Its clean surface looking almost out of place among the wreckage of everyone else's careless choices. "Funny thing," I said, letting the silence stretch until it trembled. "Out of all these envelopes, only one wasn't harmed." Their eyes followed my hand, their thoughts running wild, trying to make sense of what this meant. My daughter stepped forward, voice shaking. "Mama, what exactly was supposed to happen tonight?" And I looked at her, then at all of them, knowing the moment had finally arrived, the one they weren't ready for, because the envelopes were never the real gift. And they were about to learn why their question hung in the air like smoke, thick and impossible to breathe through. And I felt every gaze pull toward me, as if the truth were something they could grab before it slipped away again. I didn't sit. I didn't blink. I just let the weight of the moment settle, because this was the part of the night I'd been preparing for long before I ever wrote a name on an envelope. "Tonight," I said quietly, "was about seeing who could recognize value, even when it wasn't loud." My words moved through the room like slow wind, touching each of them differently. My daughter flinched. My nephew swallowed hard. Samuel shifted his stance, and my son finally looked as though he understood something he wished he didn't. I reached into the trash bag one final time, not for another envelope, but for the thin stack of papers hidden beneath them, folded in a way that only I would recognize. When I pulled it out, their breath caught, not because they knew what it was, but because the look on my face finally cracked the mask I'd worn all night. "Your gifts weren't the checks," I whispered. "Those were the test." My daughter stepped closer, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Mama, what are those papers?" I unfolded the stack slowly, letting them see the heavy signatures, the embossed seal, the legal weight behind every page. "These," I said, "were the real gifts." Silence collapsed over the room, deep and heavy. My son moved first, reaching forward like he expected the papers to tremble the moment he touched them, but I pulled them back an inch, watching their confusion twist into fear. "I was ready," I said softly, "to transfer shares tonight. Real shares, real power, real inheritance." Their faces broke open, shock, shame, longing, each emotion fighting for space. "Whoever valued the envelope," I continued, "was going to receive more than money." My nephew gasped, covering his mouth. My daughter stumbled back as if someone pushed her. My son looked like he might cry. And then Samuel's face softened for the first time in decades, because he finally understood why his envelope was untouched. He hadn't rejected the gift. He had respected the moment. I laid the paperwork on the table, the truth gleaming under the lights. "I didn't choose yet," I said. "Not until I see one more thing." Their heads snapped up, terrified and hopeful all at once. And I let the hook tighten. "I need to see what you do. When I tell you what's inside the last envelope I haven't shown you yet." The moment I said, "last envelope," their bodies leaned toward me without meaning to, pulled by a fear that felt older than tonight, older than the money, older than every wound we kept hiding behind polite smiles. I reached into my coat pocket, slow, steady, and their eyes widened when they saw a different envelope, thicker, heavier, wrapped in a band none of the others had. It had never gone near the trash. It had never been touched by grease or carelessness. This one had stayed with me all night, waiting for the moment when the truth could land exactly where it needed to. My daughter whispered, "Mama, who is that one for?" But she wasn't brave enough to step closer. My son's throat worked as he tried to swallow the panic building inside him, because he knew deep down that this envelope wasn't about money anymore. It was about meaning, about trust, about what I truly valued in this family after watching them tear through kindness like it cost nothing. Samuel straightened his back, shoulders heavy with the realization that pride had kept him from the check earlier. But maybe pride had also kept him honest. My nephew trembled, understanding there was no way to rewrite what he'd already shown me. I held the envelope against my palm and felt its weight the same way I felt every quiet betrayal and every small act of love they gave me over the years. This envelope, I said softly, wasn't hidden from you. I kept it with me because it holds something none of the other gifts had. Their breaths synced, fear pulling them together for the first time all night. It holds the name, I continued, of the person I was ready to trust with everything when I woke up this morning. And the words struck them like a blow, because suddenly, every ruined envelope, every careless laugh, every impatient tear, every prideful refusal, all of it mattered in a way they couldn't escape. My daughter covered her mouth, tears pooling. My son grabbed the back of a chair, steadying himself like the truth might knock him down. Even Samuel took a step closer, eyes fixed on the envelope like it carried the ghost of his brother. I ran my thumb along the sealed edge, feeling the moment tighten around us until no one dared move. Before I open it, I said quietly, I need to hear the truth from each of you, why you treated your gift the way you did. Their faces collapsed, fear, regret, panic fighting to take the lead, and I watched them realize that tonight wasn't about the money. It was about their hearts laid bare, and as each of them prepared to speak, the envelope in my hand grew heavier, because the next words spoken in that room would decide who it belonged to. The room shifted when I asked for the truth, so slow and silent, it felt like the air thickened between us, forcing every lie to sit heavy on their tongues. My nephew broke first, blurting out words he'd swallowed all night. I thought it was nothing, he said, voice cracking. I thought you gave us, I don't know, holiday cards. I didn't think you'd give real money like that. His honesty was messy, trembling, but at least it was honesty. My daughter-in-law followed, tears forming fast, the kind that always came when she feared losing something. I joked because everyone joked, she whispered. I didn't think you'd hear me. I didn't think you'd care. My son's face hardened at that, but he stayed quiet because he knew he'd let her talk that way about me. And now the weight of it pressed into his shoulders. Then my daughter stepped forward, pride peeling away until she stood there raw. I was angry, she said, voice thin as thread. I thought you were choosing the family company over us again. I didn't mean to destroy it. I just didn't want to feel small tonight. Her truth hit the room harder than her anger ever did. Samuel stared at the floor, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. I didn't open mine because, if it was money, I didn't want it. And if it wasn't, I didn't want to be disappointed by you. The words pierced me deeper than he intended, because behind all his resentment lived a grief he never learned to speak. Finally, my son stepped forward, eyes glossy, breath uneven. Mama, I didn't throw mine away. I put it in my coat. I was going to open it later in private. I didn't want anyone to think I expected anything from you. And there it was, the truth that cracked my mask just slightly, the kind of truth that doesn't hide behind pride or excuses. The room fell quiet, the kind of quiet that rings in the ears long after the sound dies. I held the final envelope between my fingers, feeling every confession settle into its weight. Thank you, I whispered, and their breaths hitched because they knew I meant it. But they also knew something else. Confession didn't erase consequences. I looked down at the envelope, the one that held the name of the person I had chosen before tonight began, and as I slid my thumb beneath the seal, the entire room leaned forward, because whoever's name was inside would change everything the moment I opened it. The seal broke with a soft tear that felt louder than every argument we ever had, and the room leaned in as if the truth inside could save them or finish them. I opened the envelope slowly, letting the paper breathe after being pressed against my heart all night. And when I saw the handwriting inside, my own, steady, written days ago, I felt a quiet ache rise in my chest. I looked at each of them, one by one, letting their fear settle into their bones before I spoke. Before tonight, I said softly, I already chose the person I trusted most. My daughter gripped the back of a chair. My nephew shut his eyes. My daughter-in-law held her breath. Samuel bowed his head. And my son, he stood there, hands shaking, trying to hide the hope slipping through. I turned the card toward myself, reading the name I had written, with certainty his name, my late husband's. I felt the room collapse around me, a soft, stunned silence spreading like a tide they couldn't outrun. Tonight was never about favor, I whispered. It was about reflection. I placed the empty envelope on the table. I wrote his name because he was the last person I trusted without question. But he's gone, and I needed to see who among you still moves with the kind of heart he believed in. Their eyes glistened, shame, longing, regret twisting into something quieter. I reached behind me and lifted the stack of inheritance papers again, the weight of them steady in my hands. I saw enough tonight, I said. More than you think. My son stepped forward, not claiming, not defending, just standing, steady, humbled. And in that moment, I saw something the envelopes couldn't measure: restraint. I'm not giving these away tonight, I whispered. Not yet. Their breath stopped again. But the person who showed the most truth tonight will come with me tomorrow, alone, and we'll talk about what comes next. Every face shifted, fear, hope, disbelief, each emotion sharper than the last. I turned toward the doorway, my coat waiting, the night outside cold enough to keep them still. Clean this room, I said gently. Keep every envelope. You're going to need to remember what you almost threw away. And as I stepped out, the final hook tightened behind me, because they didn't know who I'd chosen for tomorrow. And that silence shook them more than any name I could have spoken.